That said, I was offered the most amazing opportunity. Brian Gengel is the chair of the World Health and Freedom Summit. And I think I'm so proud of all of us from Queen's Park, because I mean, we started out with 6 people in total, and we've spread globally to the point where now our groups are going to be speaking at the World Health and Freedom Summit on October 25th, I believe, from 9 to 11. And I'm hosting our speakers, and I was also offered a chapter in the book, which is one of the best sellers that comes out every single year in regards to health, freedom, and wellness.
I'm Chuck Black, and this is the Age of Ingenuity, our weekly chronicle of Canada's current innovation economy. And here's what's happening. The local, the provincial, and even the federal governments have begun the process which will seemingly culminate in a second lockdown across Canada sometime later this fall. Now, this new lockdown isn't based on any increase in self-reported sickness, any increase in hospital admissions, or any actual COVID deaths, but it is wrapped almost entirely around an increased absolute number of positive tests for the coronavirus. Now, these tests are problematic and they're often inaccurate, and we're going to take a look at that.
And I'm Alan Calder, and I'm hoping that we don't follow down the same path as Australia, where I actually used to live. The totalitarian government's offensive against its citizens is breaking my heart. Someone else who's working hard to ensure that this does not happen in Canada is Kelly Anne Wolfe, the Executive Director of Mothers Against Distancing, or MAD, who's a liaison for HUGSOVERMASKS and the CEO and host of FreedomForum. And we'll be speaking with her shortly.
And we're also going to remind everyone to like, to comment, to share, to subscribe, and support this vidcast on Patreon and PayPal. Now, with that said and done, here are the stories we're currently tracking. Good God, he looks like a highway robber.
Chuck, 100%, yeah. I sent you a bunch of those pictures about stagecoach robbers, didn't I?
Yeah.
Seriously though, like I find it's too close. That's a good picture though. I'm gonna take a picture like Billy the Kid kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It might be worth putting. I've got some of them already to go, but it's something we're thinking about for the show. But that aside,
which, back on topic, reminds me of our first post of the day, the September 23rd, 2020 CBC News post, a throne speech long on language and ambition, but short on specifics, which notes that very little was said, very little was promised. It talked about a lot of extensions to existing programs and new spending. This was also referenced in a lot of other articles as well. Basically, the throne speech didn't say anything. It said we're still going to work on it. We have a couple more spending programs. We are not going to stop spending. And I suppose my real concern is related to Bill Morneau's budget overview of 3 months back. As noted in the July 9th, 2020 CBC News post, highlights of Bill Morneau's 2020 fiscal snapshot. At that time, he expected a budget deficit of 343 billion Canadian, mostly because of coronavirus mitigation plans, and those plans are still in the budget, and now the plans have been extended till at least the end of the year and into next spring. And my concern is that if the budget had ballooned to $343 billion, then it's got to be estimated at around $600 billion for the whole year. What do you think, Al?
sounds expensive. I mean, this shouldn't be a shock. Other than the speech was just another marketing garbage material chance for him. He didn't say anything. It reminded me of Rob Ford, who had a speech yesterday about nothing, planning on doing nothing. He's talking about talking and making plans. Nothing's happening here except the continuing flow of money up to the rich from us, the taxpayers. It makes me sick. He didn't do a goddamn thing again.
Yeah, and as noted before, at least in this picture from CBC, Justin Trudeau kind of looks like a highway robber.
Oh, No kid, he looks like a stagecoach robber, I think is what exactly I think about, you know? Like I've seen some pictures of them, but I mean, we're getting off track here before, before we get robbed from a stagecoach.
I agree. I don't want to say anything more about him, pulling out his flintlock pistols and saying, "Stand and deliver."
Yeah, you know what, Chuck, I would hope you not speak so harshly about our first Black Prime Minister.
I would note that CBC called the speech a promise to do everything at once. From the COVID pandemic perspective, Trudeau promised not only to keep all the programs in place and expand them, he promised to promote high-dose flu vaccines. They were heavily promoted, much like the Rob Ford speech the day or so before. And for the same reason, flu and colds have substantial overlap with symptoms of COVID. Many of us would argue that they also test positive for coronavirus if you have a flu or if you have last year's flu bug. There's an absolute serious amount of overlap between the two types of diseases.
The science for this sort of thing, for finding people to not have coronavirus, is lagging well behind the science to show people might have coronavirus on. You know
Actually, that's dead on. That's dead on accurate. We have a lot of maybes going into this. We have no real idea of what's going on. We have a second promise from the federal government: massive expanded testing capabilities being rolled out at pharmas and other locations. Again, noted previously by Premier Rob Ford 1 or 2 days ago.
Those testing facilities, the tests don't work though, Chuck. Like no one is even suggesting that the tests are working.
Yeah.
Like no one's even saying that.
No.
What has to happen is a court case, Chuck, about this garbage, and then it has to be proven in court, because they're making these decisions without any oversight of parliaments, provincially or federally, and it's not working.
No, but I agree, and I think later on in the show we're going to have some links to people in the UK and people in Texas who have specific concerns about the specific testing regime being used there, and as I understand being used here. I think it's perfectly sensible to do this. I would also argue that more and more and more tests are needed in order to get fewer and fewer positive responses. Even if we're talking about false positives, I think it's worth noting that 35, 40,000, 45,000 tests are being taken every single day now. And we're getting maybe 1/10 of the positive, maybe 1/5 of the positives we were getting at the peak of the pandemic. So trumpeting the positive numbers without context just increases fear. It doesn't really solve anything.
It doesn't. It's not scientific at all. It's just statistical garbage.
Yeah.
It's his marketing statistical bullshit, and it's just going on and on and on, costing us, what do you say, Chuck? 340 or 500 additional $1 billion on?
I would say it's going to be north of 600 billion before the final budget tally is made at the end of this year.
More like by the time the bill comes in, it'll be $1 trillion is the thing.
Maybe, especially if this stuff goes to spring next year. It'll easily make $1 trillion.
How are they going to spend all the money if they have to stop doing that in the end of spring? What they're doing is they're setting up a baseline for building a new government industry, or rather ministries for this stuff.
Yeah, I would agree.
This is going to fall into this. Watch all Orwellian ministries opening up. You know, the love jails. You know, the COVID containment units with padded walls or whatever they want to call them. But they'll watch the doublespeak going crazy though soon enough, and all these new government offices opening up.
No, I would argue that it's perfectly rational to note that fascism begins with a promise from the government to take care of all of our needs. And that's what the Trudeau government promised. I even note that from our perspective of the innovation economy, the September 23rd, 2020 Logic Post, What the Liberal Throne Speech Means for the Innovation Economy. That article notes specifically that the throne speech promised to maintain existing support programs and add a bunch of new programs, but no specifics whatsoever. Absolutely nothing.
You know, I was thinking, Chuck, I was wondering about myself, if I could follow up on his past throne speeches from the throne and what he's said and what they've not lived up to. Because I know there's been a few of them, but I know there's got to be articles coming at the wazoo about that.
I would say that's a perfectly good idea.
Look at his
Yeah.
shady eyes here. Just give him the money and just give him the money. Let him take the stagecoach and don't hurt the kids there. That's what I think about that picture.
No, that's what I think. He's taken our money. He's given it back to us in a different way, shape, or form,
Oh,
pretending
that's
it's
sweet of
not our
him.
money, and he's keeping a little bit for expenses.
Yeah, and letting other people share this as some sort of kitty for their projects that they've got going on too,
No,
tax free.
absolutely correct. I also note that Trudeau wasn't happy having the Governor General, Julie Payette, read the speech from the throne. He's the only prime minister who felt he needed to go on national television the same evening to provide essentially the same speech, a shorter version with more dramatic inflection.
Yeah, I know.
And he didn't say very much. He mostly said the same thing over again in the evening. I would note the September 23rd CBC news post: as caseloads spike in 4 provinces, Trudeau warns that the pandemic will be worse in the fall. That referenced the earlier throne speech, which said the second wave of the pandemic is here, and lots of inferences that steps could be taken in the future, but nothing specific, nothing we could vote on. I find that most disconcerting. And he also said we can't get together for Thanksgiving. I've never had a prime minister cancel Thanksgiving before.
Well, next up, Christmas, they canceled church and various observations that people do in their religion, right?
Yeah.
And
To
like
be fair to Trudeau, he said maybe we can have Christmas.
oh, maybe this isn't that maybe fantastic.
Yeah.
Not very merry of you then.
I also noticed that he feels pretty comfortable, and he has good reason for this, as noted in the September 23rd, 2020 National Post article: O'Toole Blanchett throne speech response complicated by the COVID-19 infections. Most of the opposition has tested positive, asymptomatically positive for the coronavirus. They can't. They have to self-quarantine for the next 2 weeks, so they're essentially off the table. Trudeau has a bye for the throne speech.
How are they going to tell when they're recovered if they are not showing any symptoms and are therefore not sick? What are they recovering from?
Damned if I know. But it was also noted in that article that the NDP will likely support the throne speech, even though they're not comfortable that Trudeau hasn't thrown enough money at the healthcare system. I mean, he's thrown money at everything. How can the NDP argue that he hasn't thrown enough at any specific department?
At the right things. Well, they have to get up and say throw more money then, or they're not doing their job, right?
Yeah, fair enough. I would also note that provincial Premier Doug Ford explicitly noted that he was disappointed by the lack of specific new programs for provincial health care. As I note, this is one of the things he was explicitly waiting for when he was giving his presentations and his speeches a couple of days previous.
Yeah, and he said nothing also.
Yeah.
Like, the problem is, there's at the provincial and federal level, no one is saying or doing anything except spending more and more money on the same things again and again until we're broke.
That makes me uncomfortable. That makes me think that they don't know what's going on, and they're accepting third-party expert advice devoid of political context.
Or how's this, Chuck? They do know what's going on. They're just cutting us out of this decision-making process. They know exactly what's going on.
I absolutely agree. They're cutting us out of this decision-making process.
You know, they're not. There's very little oversight. This to me is screaming, why bother with elections now? That they're not doing anything anyway.
Yeah.
Why?
No, I agree. There's not going to be an election. The NDP is going to vote with the government.
Yeah, I agree. But that's the thing. I saw an interview with Jadveen Singh last night that he had taken after this Trudeau budget pep rally thing.
Yeah.
And for our throne speech pep rally, but he said, oh well, if they did this and that, we'll support it. And I thought, you lying piece of garbage, man. You know you're going to support this because that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
You know, and then the Conservatives play, well, we're angry now, so I guess we'll not support it. And it's got to be, the whole system is adversarial. It doesn't work unless there's two sides fighting against each other. Like,
I would argue that the two sides are not fighting against each other as hard as they could. I mean, Ford is a conservative premier, and he's basically towing the line with the federal person.
Absolutely, I can agree.
I would argue that there might be a reason for this. I would say the announcements all come with a history, and they may indeed be reading from the same playbook. I am guessing that most of the provincial and federal government responses are based on computer modeling algorithms developed, at least in part, on a study from the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. And that's a non-governmental organization funded in the US in 2007 by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And you know, they are definitely in favor of continued lockdowns. And to that end, I note the September 21st, 2020 City TV post. Ontario COVID-19 death toll could top 7,300 by January 1st, according to a study. That study was made by the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, and it predicts 7,300 new coronavirus deaths by January 1st, 2021 in Canada. And this is on top of the estimated 2,300 people who have died up until now, maybe just with coronavirus.
With or off, right?
Yeah.
Like the problem with these numbers is that they're not reliable, as they don't know, they even don't know if they can test this stuff either. They can't test anything here. They've done a crappy job of this whole thing. They can't even test it. Therefore, they need to just keep throwing up this hyperbole garbage to keep us guessing about what's going on. Seriously,
no, I would agree. There are substantial problems with, I think they call it the PVR testing, which is, the PCR testing, which is being used mostly around the world right now. And I'll include 3 articles in the show notes that specifically reference concerns over the PCR testing in the UK and in Texas. I would also say that these sorts of modeling have never been right. They started doing that back in January and February and March, and we're supposed to have like hundreds of thousands dead in Canada up until now. We got 2,300, and that's using the PCR testing that I perceive and you perceive of as being problematic. I would also note that the decisions are being made using this modeling. For that, I referenced the September 18th, 2020 Activist Post article. A supercomputer is deciding the politics of Australians. And that article notes that the supercomputer analysis being used by the Victoria Premier, Dan Andrews, and his government is being used to force increasingly heavy-handed measures to lock down and restrict freedom of movement and speech in the Western Australian state. So that's my fear. I think everybody is running out of the same playbook. Doug Ford said that he wasn't. He explicitly said that a couple days ago in his press conference. But all this fear mongering, unless we don't go outside, unless we don't shake hands, unless we lock our children in boxes, all this stuff just completely is driving me nuts.
And if we don't protest, unless you're at a BLM protest.
Yeah, BLM, for some reason, they get a buy on this. And so does Doug Ford. Went to a wedding a month ago. No social distancing, more than 50 people. Lots of toast, lots of hanging together. No masks. And there are photos of him. So yeah.
Rules for me, but not for thee. Rules for thee, but not for me. I make the rules. I don't follow the ruals I make. Jesus, I'm a politician, for crying out loud.
Yeah, that's
by the way, Chuck, just so you know, he's not. Dan's in Victoria is what it's called, not the Western Australia, which is an actual state.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry about that. I get confused quickly.
I'm Chuck. I'm just glad that I can bring some regional knowledge to the place that I've actually lived, so I can brag about it. You're welcome. You're welcome.
You're welcome.
And I'm speaking with Kelly Anne Wolfe, the executive director of MAD, or Mothers Against Distancing, and who is also a liaison to Hugs Nation.
We work with about 46 different organizations across the entire country. We've expanded globally, and there's events popping up everywhere to refute all this abuse of power from the governments around the world. So mainly in Canada, this Saturday, I'm attending a public inquiry on Parliament Hill with Doug Force from the Mythos Canada to join the Canadian Revolution in raising awareness and inquiring why the government was allowed to invoke the Emergencies Act when they did not meet the requirements within the Act. So that's going to be a very interesting thing. Aside from that, also what's happening on Saturday, if people can't make it out to support us in Ottawa, we're having a massive event at Dundas Square in Toronto. I think it's hosted by the Line Canada. And Hugs is going to be there, of course, to support 100%. Matt is going to be there. Chris Sky will be speaking, and we hope that everybody will make it out to that as well. So we're having a massive event at Queen's Park on October 17th. And this event we're doing in collaboration with our allies in Vancouver. So Laura Lynn, Ryan Kabolba, you know, a celebration of freedom and rights is out there. But this event is going to be particularly special because we've got a panel that we're developing.
Right.
So we have a panel of our experts versus the government's so-called experts in regards to COVID. And we have names like Del Bigtree and Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, Dr. Batar, Dr. Denny Rancourt, Dan Dix from Press for Truth is going to be there. Brian Crombie has been invited. We have Dr. Judy Mikovits has been invited. Dr. Sakdev Sidhu has been invited. And the entire point is to set up a proper panel to get to the facts around surrounding COVID, because there is absolutely no reason for all these restrictions to continuously be imposed upon Canadians. It has a 99.9% survival rate. It is not a threat, and the government is absolutely abusing powers. Like, I'm not sure if you guys, if you saw, Al, Randy Hillier was in Parliament, and he brought forth the fact that none of this is relevant anymore, and that the government is absolutely abusing powers.
What kind of doctors are going to go for the government and say anything sensible, though? Seriously.
Well, our doctors will, and that's a fact. So what we're doing is that we've been encouraging the public to start writing letters to their public health ministers and inviting them to attend the panel. Now, in order for them to RSVP, they would have to send their RSVP to Kelly Anne Wolfe at freedomforumnews.com.
Right.
So, and if they're interested, I also sent an invite, a proper invite to the Gates Foundation.
Oh, nice.
So, and I did receive a response that they're reviewing the request. So hopefully, you never know.
Yeah, could you pass something on for me too?
So I launched a new project as well, and it's called the Freedom Forum News. You guys are going to be seeing this expand, and maybe we can work together on many things. As you know, I have invited you guys to help take the lead when it comes to our event on October 17th, and I look forward to working with you guys. We're also going to be working with Brian Crombie from Canada One TV, which is fantastic, and a bunch of familiar faces that you guys are good with. But I encourage everybody out there, make sure you come to Queen's Park on October 17th. We have live music kicking off the day. We've got acoustic bands, Jason Lambert from Hamilton, he'll be playing, opening the show. We have Robert Laidlaw from Platinum Blonde and Friends, and then we've got Robin Benedict with her entire band. And then we have a panel, and after the panel, we've got David Icke. David Icke is going to be rallying all the people in Toronto for a march, prepping a march for the Line Canada.
Well, that's pretty good stuff, though. That's a very exciting thing. People need to know about this sort of thing. And those are the stories we're covering this week. As always, the articles we've referenced are in the show notes.
Keep in touch with us on Facebook, on Gab, on LinkedIn, Minds, Pinterest, Steemit, and Twitter. Check out other stories we're tracking on our Innovation News and upcoming events Scoop It feeds. And remember, like, subscribe, share, and comment on our posts. Your actions will feed the algorithms and bots which help to distribute our stories. And if you'd like to promote your event or your activity, or if you think you have insight into Canada's current innovation economy, then send me an email. I'm at chuck.black@protonmail.com.
And we're currently on YouTube and BitChute and hope to be on other platforms soon. If you like the content we create, send us some money to our Patreon and PayPal accounts. We really appreciate your patronage.
And that's all for this week. We'll be back next week with more stories covering our current age of ingenuity.